Welcome to Understanding Today. My dear guests, we are broadcasting on Muslim Network TV, aiming to educate and empower the Muslim American community and represent it to broader society. Muslim Network TV broadcasts to the US, Canada, and Mexico. Our show Understanding Today is live streaming on social media and YouTube. You can watch us via Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Roku TV, and soon on Apple TV. We will continue to cover interesting cutting-edge topics of relevant interest to current circumstances: economic, legal, technology, business management, strategic leadership, principled guidance, all of that. Today, we've got a fascinating topic to be addressed: criticality of race relations in a polarized society. And we have with us just about the perfect person to address it, Reverend B. Herbert Martin, a pastor and civil rights activist. He hails from Mount Bayou, Mississippi, a BA from Philander Smith College, Masters of Divinity from Garrett Theological Seminary, decades of service as a pastor at leading United Methodist churches. A committed civil rights proponent, he joined the NAACP as a child under the leadership of the legendary Dr. T.R.M. Howard. Reverend Martin led the largest branch of the NAACP in the nation as the president and executive director of the Chicago South Side branch of NAACP. He served as chairman of the Chicago Housing Authority and executive director of the Chicago Commission on Human Relations. Active in a range of religious and civic activities, including the One Church, One Child, the Million March projects, Reverend Martin was best known in the 80s as the pastor of the late Chicago Mayor Harold Washington. I consider him a true leader in this space and a dear friend. And as we start our discussions, I also want us all to know that he comes with a unique qualification. He has a especially designated name from the Asona clan of the Fonte tribe in Ghana. Kejo Oyedizi.
Yes.
Man of peace, the one who creates order, the smart and funny, the wonderful orator. I present to you my dear friend, Reverend Herbert Martin. Welcome to our show, Reverend Martin.
Thank you very much, my dear brother Kareem. I am honored to join you. Thank you for the invitation to come.
Thank you for coming in. Well, we have a lot to talk about, focusing on various aspects of race relations and civil rights, going back to the time that you started in this space, then and now. What is the state of the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, the so-called calls for reformation of the police, all of that. But what I would like to do, Reverend Martin, is take us back a little bit in time. Take us down memory lane, growing up in Mississippi, and what dragged you into this. I know you have the iconic story you've experienced about being beaten up when you were in high school. How about telling us what drove you into this arena?
Wow, that is quite a book of memory. Of course, I was placed into it under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King, of course, who was very active in those days. I became active in 1954. That's a long time ago. And really the lynching of a young fellow from Chicago by the name of Emmett Till in the summer of 1955. And then subsequent to that, with the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King in late 1955. So I became active just really in 1955, and having that experience of so many of my friends and loved ones being lynched and killed and murdered in the state of Mississippi. So all of that is a watershed era in my early development in the movement that we called it. And moving out of the 1950s and of course into the early 1960s, I was trained in nonviolent demonstration by the Reverend James Bevel. And James Bevel in those days was an apostle of Dr. Martin Luther King and was a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of which I was a significant part, along with Stokely Carmichael and some of the others.
Reverend Martin, if I may, if with your permission, you have already used the word, I think that is very critical in these current times too, the non-violent response. You've used it about 5 times in that initial response. And I want you to take us back to the roots of the feeling of nonviolence. You're speaking as somebody who was a kid, 9 years old, beaten up by white thugs. You've experienced lynchings and direct assaults, serious injuries to your friends and relatives, and yet you were indoctrinated in proper action. Tell us what that means and what led you to that.
Yes, well, the nonviolent doctrine was certainly promoted by early members of the civil rights movement. And we just lost one of my dear colleagues and friends, John Lewis,
of course,
who was along, with us in those days. But it really goes back to other men who were like mentors to Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Howard Thurman, and these men who went with Martin Luther King to meet Mahatma Gandhi. Mm-hmm. And they brought the philosophy of nonviolence back from India, from the movement of Mahatma Gandhi, which was a nonviolent philosophy. And we were indoctrinated with that, that nonviolence was the way to achieve and the word would be, it's a Sanskrit word called satyagraha, mm-hmm. Which was the way of Gandhi. Sure. And we were indoctrinated in satyagraha, working for peace and justice in that philosophy. No matter what violence we had to face, we were seriously committed to understand that the way to achieve lasting peace and justice would be through nonviolent means. So I was indoctrinated.
Reverend Martin, again, I'm interrupting because that is a message that needs to be imbibed within our souls and bodies in order to reflect outwardly in a peaceful manner, and that, so bear with me, because yes, the Gandhian movement of satyagraha, the focus on the truth shall prevail if you follow appropriate, correct approaches. So again, I'm asking this question from a slightly different perspective. When you face personal agony, when you face personal pain and distress, and you see your fellow friends, your relatives, your community members face that, the initial response, of course, is outrage and you want to do something, but yet what you have grown up with and what we need to be, I'm presuming your message is, whatever happens, the reaction has to come from this perspective of self-control and doing what is right despite of what is being done to us. Speak a little bit about that, please.
At the core of our being has to be the love for peace, irregardless of the circumstances around us. So this deep commitment to bring about community has to be at the core of our being, and that core has to be love. Love for humanity, love for ourselves as well, and to work regardless of what's going on, the violence around us. We have to be focused on our ultimate goal, which is peace, which is love and love for neighbor. And it is be by these means, which is the whole principle of Dr. King. If you would study his whole way, it was grounded in love. You remember the saying that he had, that's a moral arc of the universe, but it bends toward love. It bends toward justice. Yeah. It is my task and the task of those who are with me to help bend that moral arc toward peace and toward love.
Wonderful. See, that gives me the segue to take this a little bit forward. As you attended the 1963 March on Washington, the impact of the Voting Rights Act of 65, and then of Dr. King's death in 1968, and the experiences that came from that as you moved to Chicago, and then you faced the hot part of racial tensions on the South Side. So speak to us a little bit about that experience and how that led into how you represented the wonderful late Mayor Harold Washington.
Yes. Let me say that in the midst of the struggle for peace and justice, for those of us who are in the major demonstrations, whether it was the March on Washington, there had to be some degree of victory celebrated. We had to see some victory. And the victory came in the games of the early 1960s, in the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, the 1965 Voting Rights Bill. These were the victories that gave us even more momentum and determination to push toward justice, to push that way. So in this struggle, you have to have some kind of celebration, achievement of victory. And those major civil rights bills signed into law were our times to celebrate victory. Now, of course, you're out of one challenge into another. Racism and white supremacy does not die simply because we celebrate a few victories. That evil continues to be there. So as we celebrate knowing that the journey is still long. It is still ahead of us. So what I encountered in Chicago, it was amazing. As Dr. King said, the racism that existed in Chicago was worse than the bigotry and white supremacy we experienced in the South. And I remember in 1966, when we were marching for fair housing in Chicago, the hatred of those white folk there in neighborhoods like I'm trying to think of that, Garfield, Garfield Park, in those areas. That was worse than some of the things we experienced in Mississippi and Alabama in our struggle there. So
that is amazing, that is amazing that you can say that was your experience.
That's amazing. Hatred knows no geographical location. So much of what we experienced in the mid-1960s, can you hear me? There was a little interruption there on my phone.
There you go.
Can you hear me now, Kareem?
Yes, perfectly fine.
Kareem,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
So what we experienced in the mid-1960s which was also during the Black Power movement, we still had the upward fight and battle to deal with not the segregation as we experienced it in the South, but what we were dealing with in Chicago was segregation based in public policy.
Sure.
It was redlining and the other forms of legalized segregation as we knew it in terms of housing, redlining, and so forth.
Well, it is fascinating, Reverend. At that time, I'm speaking about around 1982.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you, Kareem.
Can you hear me?
I'm losing your audio.
Okay, let me try it again. Well, we'll manage with these technology disruptions. Are you able to hear me now better?
I barely can hear you.
Okay, I will speed up. I'll try my best to speak loudly and see if we can make it. Okay, now.
But what I would do is let me say that organization, determination is what we had to do through the NAACP, through Operation Breadbasket that soon became Operation Push, and the other civil rights leaders in the 1960s help us organize to push a strong civil rights agenda in the city of Chicago.
Right. Reverend, can you hear me
these
now?
were the early days.
Are you able to hear me?
Kareem, I'm losing sound for you.
Okay, my apologies. Are you able to, let me just try it out. I'm sure our folks are looking into it. But if you are able to hear me, the question I have for you to talk about is, as you addressed Mayor Washington's call for racial unity, tell us about your experience in the Chicago Housing Authority and then the Race Relations Commission, because I want to rely on that to speak about how things are being impacted today. Did you get that?
Yes. Well, coming out of the 1960s into the 1970s, when the political life was being ignited by the personality of Harold Washington. Mm-hmm. His first run for mayor was in 1979. He ran and he lost, but the organization that he put together stayed strong. And what we learned during those days was that organization and education and getting everybody registered to vote gave him the foundation to run and win in 1983. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
And then with his election as mayor of the city, that was a great deal of empowerment and organization in the African American community. That was like our, what you want to call it, that was like our paradise, political paradise for a while. A great deal of a sense of community and togetherness. But as I said earlier, racism does not die. Evil does not die that easy. But with his passing and with his death, all of that came back to the fore. Right. It was during that period that I was appointed as chairman of the Commission on Human Relations. Right. Working to bring the diverse communities of Chicago together.
Sure. Reverend Martin, what I was trying to focus on there was what made, do you think, Harold Washington focus on the call for racial unity at those times as a means for moving forward as Chicago society?
Yes. Harold of course, was a political genius, and he knew that there were two large ethnic groups in the city of Chicago. One, of course, was the African American community, and the other was the Polish community. And he knew that if he could bring these two groups together, bring the unity between the Polish community and the African American community, along with whatever, liberal whites and Hispanics, that he could really heal the racial divide within the city. He was correct. He was absolutely correct. And he succeeded in bringing that coalition together, the Polish community and the African American community, along with the Hispanics. However, it was that second term when he died.
Sure. Well, you hit
when
a
he
key point
died.
there. Reverend,
Can you hear me?
Reverend, sorry to interrupt. That is precisely what I want to build upon, bringing things forward. The astute recognition at that time that there had to be a healing and a bonding of different racial communities that was successfully accomplished for a while, at least under Mayor Washington. And you have direct experience in that, in healing racial tensions. I'm trying to now bring that to the current situation as we face the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, what do you see as the parallels in terms of the divide within the different racial segments of American society today? And what are the possibilities of blending them together into a coalition for peaceful coexistence?
Yes, and Kareem, you're correct, because there really is no real peace and harmony unless we bring divergent groups together. There has to be a common unity, a togetherness among the magnificent diversity of ethnic groups that exist in Chicago. Harold understood that, and that's what he was working toward, to bring the magnificent diversity of groups together, religious and ethnic groups. It was my job and my task during those days to help him to bring these divergent groups together. We succeeded in doing so, but with his death, that coalition fell apart. Now, what needs to happen is new leadership committed to racial unity, ethnic unity, peace, togetherness. And I feel, even today, that if we could bring together our religious communities in particular, especially the Abrahamic groups, the Jewish, the Islamic, the Christian groups, if we can bring peace and understanding together among these three groups, we can make a giant step toward the kind of unity that we seek. A giant step toward what I call satyagraha.
Sure. Reverend, then help me out there.
I'm so sorry that I cannot hear you, Kareem.
No problem. We will manage somehow. Let's take this forward, Reverend, because in all of the discourses that I have seen around the country on Black Lives Matter, I have felt there is a missing link that we are talking about. The fact that, yes, everybody has to focus on what is going on with the systemic racism and discrimination and oppression of the Black people and address that, but also address this in the context of getting all of the minorities, the different racial segments together on a common platform that in a way addresses inequality, inequities in a larger context. Does you see where I'm heading? Talk a little bit about it.
Yes. And the whole discussion around Black Lives Matter, I think this pandemic has helped those individuals who would always give a retort when we would say Black Lives Matter, the retort would be all lives matter.
Mhm.
All right? Yes, all lives do matter, and especially Black lives.
Of course.
And it has been this new consciousness, this new level of consciousness that said, yes, all lives matter. Okay, if all lives matter, then why is it that Black lives don't matter?
Sure.
So we are trying to have a new conversation, a new level of consciousness that is inclusive of Black lives.
Excellent. And let us segue into the faith communities part of it, because you've addressed that briefly. I know particularly I've had the privilege of working with you and other leaders here in the interfaith world. What is the role of faith leaders, faith communities, and faith participants in the current situation with support of Black Lives Matter, but addressing everything in terms of inequity?
Yes, I am a firm believer that there is a significant, a critical role for religious leadership and religious communities to play in seeking peace and justice in our city and in our world. As I was saying earlier, that if we could bring better understanding between the Abrahamic traditions, who are justice lovers according to the teachings of our books, and peace lovers according to the teachings of our books, if we could seriously do that, we could make a giant step ahead for bringing peace in the world, bringing justice in the world. Black Lives Matter, I believe, has impacted, the movement for Black Lives Matter that happened this summer. Is a step in the right direction, and I believe now that even though it got politicized a little bit, by our current political leadership, I believe that people generally, that Americans generally, have come to a greater understanding of what has happened, the systemic injustices that exist in our country. And we are now working to dismantle that. And I believe that if we could not only understand the political dimensions of it, but the humanity of it, what the things that African Americans and Black people in general have endured is just inhumane. To see what happened with police brutality, for instance,
Right.
It reminds you of our days when the lynchings took place in this country.
Sure.
But now, I believe that this summer, even in the midst of the pandemic that we've experienced, this summer, people have been quarantined and they have been able to listen to the facts and listen to the cries and the moans of African Americans at a level that has really touched the conscience of our society.
Wonderful.
And that's what needs to happen.
Reverend Martin,
that's how Dr. King was successful.
Okay.
The conscience of the nation was touched. And I believe that Black Lives Matter has become a conscience-raising issue, a reality, in our nation.
Excellent. With respect,
and the religious leadership, mind you, religious leadership is very, very key. Has played a very key role in raising that conscience level.
Excellent. The point I wanted to add, Reverend, was with respect to the religious leadership in these times, and I want to see if you concur with this. We cannot just have the leaders speaking platitudes about working together and getting to understand the other faith communities better. I believe there is a strong imperative for these religious leaders to educate their own congregations about the significance of justice and equality in their faiths, and then the imperative of going out, taking a stance, speaking and acting in pursuit of those faith-based directives to uphold the rights of others, especially those who are oppressed, and speak out for truth and justice. So this has to be an action-oriented project within the faith communities first, and then going out and engaging the fellow citizens of other faiths. What do you think about that?
I think that is very key. It has to leave the level of leadership and get into the hearts and minds of the community, the people. And I think the success of what I was experiencing in Chicago was that we were actually not only talking to leaders, that was a very significant part of our work. We have to talk to the leaders, but then the leaders have to bring the people together.
Right.
You know, congregations need to know each other. And we were doing that through exchange dialogues, actually visiting the local community. African Americans need to get into the Jewish community or the Muslim community, exchanging and talking and dialoguing, sharing food. And usually that's a good way to start it, around the tables, you know. And we can begin those by small gatherings. I invite you to my house, and to my family. You invite me to yours, and we extend that throughout the community. Yes, I agree with you. It has to leave the leadership level and get down to the heart and minds of the people.
Well, you know what? I'm reminded amusingly at this time of the time back in the days of Mayor Washington. You will recall when Mayor Jane Byrne was courting you and the Progressive Community Church. There were donations made to the church. And then the insightful Harold Washington, what does he do? He joins the church, attends your sermons.
Yeah.
What
you got a good memory. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So bringing it into the heart of the community, the political leadership, the religious leadership, the business leadership has to leave the conference table and come to the community.
Wonderful. In the time that we have left, Reverend Martin, and I apologize for the audio issues at your end, let us talk about the pervasive call for the so-called defunding the police, the misunderstanding around that term. I just don't appreciate that term. Personally, I want to get your perspective. What we are essentially talking about is addressing the necessary reform, corrections, and focusing on what is the police best equipped to do, what are their competencies, where should the resources be dedicated. This is what comes out when you speak to knowledgeable people within the police forces, the chiefs of police, even the folks who are in the police union leadership. So can you address that? Because we have a duty to clear that up for our audience.
By all means, I think, you know, words and terminology really keep us from getting to the heart of the matter. And the word to defund the police has a negative overtone.
Absolutely.
So what we were saying, let's redirect some of the resources, the money. Mm-hmm. We cannot expect the police to be social workers. Mm-hmm. Or we cannot expect the police to really be the what I want to call them, the first responders. Like, you know, you need a different set of skills for that. Police are not trained to be social workers. We cannot expect them to be that. So let's take the resources from these departments and redirect them, not defund them, but redirect the money, the resources. The question of the police union remains a big issue for us. Mm-hmm. So we have to really get the right minds around the table to see how we can really negotiate and understanding and where resources need to be flowing. So I'm not an advocate of defund the police, no, but I am an advocate to let's work for reform. Let's work for changes in the way in which police are trained. And then let's train those individuals who can take up the slack. However, there is no excuse for police to be inhumane, to see the kind of brutality and the misuse of force that we have seen in the past. In the cases, and we can call the names of those who have died needlessly at the hands of the police. So to defund the police is not what I would advocate, but let's make better use of the resources.
Wonderful.
Let's make a different use of the resources rather than taking away money from the police. We need the police. We need the police. But what we don't need is the brutality.
Right.
And the use of force.
Agreed. As we approach the last 5 minutes or so of our time that is left, let us address from your perspective this concept of partnership and collaborations with the police so that there is a give and take. There is accountability on both sides, on their side, on the police side, in understanding what is permissible, what is acceptable, not just under the law, but under community sensitivities, concern for those that they are serving. And at the same time, the burden on me, on us as those who are seeking the help of the police in understanding the difficulties they face and what role we have to play in making sure the security and safety of our communities becomes also a share of the burden we take on along with the police. So I'd like to...
And so Kareem, you use some words that are very key. Accountability. There has to be accountability. The other word that I would place in our discussion is the word trust. Mm-hmm. Trust. You see, in some of these departments, the corruption is so entrenched that it's going to take a while for the communities to trust these departments, to trust police, because of the I call it the intrinsic the entrenched corruption that we have lived with the police. Now, accountability, whatever we come to the table with, we have to be accountable, not only accountable, but responsible for the agreements that we choose. And there has to be that level of accountability. Here's another word, compassion. Man, do we need some compassion in the discussion? So accountability, trustworthiness, the eradication of corruption in these departments, and certainly learning to trust each other again.
Well, see, that makes a lot of sense, Reverend. But what we need to also start focusing on is building up movements toward reaching out to the folks in authority, including the police, with an open mind at our end and expecting and hoping for an open mind at their end, so that there is a platform where trust can be engendered. While disagreements, until the key points of disagreement are practically addressed. So those platforms have to be somehow nurtured with the right level of leadership up front, allowing people to get together to discuss and address disagreements. What do you say to that?
I think you're very, very right, because in such a place, in such a space, the community can express its anger, its frustration, its hurt, its pain, and that has to be a time for that to be heard and understood. If there's any kind of disagreement between police and community, and if there's going to be a future relationship between police and community, there has to be a time where I guess honest conversation can take place between the both. If we're not going to be honest with each other, if we're not going to really negotiate seriously a new relationship, and and the community and the police at this point of our time together as community and the police, we are not partners at all. We don't see ourselves as partners, and that discussion has to be reconciling. It has to be space where the police listens and hears the heart and the pain of the community, and the community listen and hears from the police. I think these are the beginning. What we have witnessed this summer will be the beginning of these kinds of honest conversations between community and police.
Fantastic. Well, a couple of minutes left, Reverend, but I would be remiss if I did not ask you to address in a minute or so what's going on in Ghana, because we want to have an international perspective on what is the man of peace, the man of order doing on an international basis.
I'm so happy you asked me, Kareem, because with the pandemic being such a global challenge for us, we have not been able to do the kind of conversation and exchange that we were doing. But what I believe strongly is that African Americans in particular have a lot to offer to the indigenous continent. It is not enough for us to learn a few dialects or to wear interesting African clothing or to eat African food. We must invest our energy, our money, our wealth, our time in helping the indigenous brothers and sisters, joining them in partnership for the development of the continent. That means that we've got to spend some money there. We've got to go there and be a part of its development. I was so happy to see some of the things happening on the continent with the organization of several of the countries, and I'm forgetting the name of it. It is something similar to the after you get past 75, Kareem, everything slips your memory. But anyway, this idea of unity, togetherness, development, developing the educational systems, and so forth. We have to make that kind of commitment to the development of the continent and the development of the countries.
Fantastic. Reverend Martin, you have just been amazing. We could go on and on. Given the constraints of time, I want to make sure that I close this out by building upon what you just concluded with, that we as fellow Americans, we as fellow citizens, we need to be sure we are investing in the other, not just trying to say that I support the other. We need to invest our time, our resources, our commitments to truly understand what drives the other, what drives the other minorities, what drives the other cultures, what drives the other faiths, and then trying to come together on a common platform to do things for the betterment of society. What a wonderful conversation we've had. Reverend Herbert Martin, what you've accomplished in your lifetime is just phenomenal. You remain a role model for all of us, and I'd love to have you back here so that we can continue our conversation. Thank you so much.
I would love to come back and especially talk about what I am doing in Africa.
Wonderful.
In Ghana, to tell you about the work that we're doing there and the things that we have been able to accomplish.
Wonderful, wonderful.
All
Thank
right.
you so
God
much.
bless.
Thanks for walking.
Salam.
Take care. Bye-bye.